Welcome back to our coverage of the death of Fidel Castro, dead overnight at the age of 90.
They're celebrating in the streets of Miami's Little Havana, but it is a much different scene in Havana, Cuba, and that is where Hannah Berkeley is this morning.
Many Cubans right now are waking up to the news that former President Fidel Castro has passed away at the age of 90. The news came in many forms late last night. Many Cuban youth were out on the streets socializing as they do any weekend night. The news came via phone calls, many family members from abroad calling, telling them the news. They could hear partying going on in Miami, but the streets of Havana looked very different. There's a much more solemn mood. Many of the elderly Cubans I spoke to who actually remember the pre-Castro days of Cuba and fought for the Cuban Revolution say that they have Fidel and the revolution to thank for everything that they have. They'll actually be able to pay homage to the former president in one of the iconic centers of the city at the Plaza of the Revolution. Then a few days later, his cremated remains will be brought to Santiago de Cuba, where they'll be buried alongside Cuba's national poet and hero, Jose Marti. Paula?
Hannah Berkeley reporting from Havana for us this morning.
Let's bring in now ABC News political contributor Alex Castellano from our Washington, D.C. bureau. Alex was born in Cuba, came to the U.S. shortly after Castro took power. We also want to include in this part of the discussion ABC's Tom Llamas, who's here with us in studio, has been speaking very powerfully about his family's experience. His parents fled Cuba many years ago, and you were raised among Cuban expats here in this country. Alex, let me start with you. You have a story, a very powerful story of being in school as a child under a newly empowered Fidel Castro. What was that like?
Well, that's one of the reasons my parents left Cuba, took us out of Cuba to the United States. I would, when Castro took over, I would bring home from school the color-in pictures of the brave Cuban soldier bayoneting the cowardly American soldier, brainwashing the kids. And one day at school, our teachers said, all right, kids, pray to God for ice cream. And we closed our eyes, no ice cream. And then the teacher says, well, let's ask Fidel for ice cream. And yay, we got ice cream. At first, the Castro regime tried to undermine the church before they decided it was easier to co-opt it. But that's the story of Fidel and Raul Castro in Cuba and 60 years of socialism and communism and failure.
Alex, you told us your parents got you out of Cuba in 1961. You left with $11 and 2 suitcases. Do you think, after this death overnight of Fidel Castro, that things will change on the ground in the country of your birth?
I'm hopeful, but I'm not optimistic. You know, Raul Castro basically has been in power since 2006, since 2008 officially. And Cuba is a military oligopoly. It's run by the military, the generals. Raul Castro is the head of the military. And all business in Cuba runs through a thing called Gaesa, which is a conglomerate owned by the military itself. And 60 to 80% of Cuban economic activity goes through this military-owned, basically, conglomerate. So I think if both Castros left, you would still see Cuba, very much like Egypt, run, controlled by the military.
And Tom, you were mentioning earlier during the commercial break, I know that this is somewhat of an emotional day for you, for so many Cuban Americans, but you said that you and your family have been waiting for this day. Now that it's here, how do you reconcile those emotions?
It's interesting. Almost every New Year's Eve, Cuban Americans' families say next year in Havana, you know, or next year in Cuba. That's what you kind of celebrate. I think it's a time for reflection. It's a time to remember all of our relatives that came over, like my grandparents, who never got to see their country again, but who never fully unpacked their briefcases and their luggage because they thought there would be a day where they could go back. As far as Cuba changing, more than 75% of Cubans right now have known no leader other than Fidel Castro or Raul Castro. They don't know what democracy looks like. For any change to happen, it's going to have to happen with the Cuban people.
Probably should not expect overnight change. Yeah. Tom Llamas, that image of your grandparents never fully unpacking is indelible. Thank you very much, both to Tom Llamas and Alex Castellano.